Neville Goddard, Out of This World, Chapter 1, Thinking Fourth-Dimensionally. And now, I have told you, before it comes to pass, that when it comes to pass, ye might believe. John 14:29. Many persons, myself included, have observed events before they occurred. That is, before they occurred in this world of three dimensions. Since man can observe an event before it occurs in the three dimensions of space, life on Earth must proceed accordingly to plan, and this plan must exist elsewhere in another dimension and be slowly moving through our space. If the occurring events were not in this world when they were observed, then, to be perfectly logical, they must have been out of this world. And whatever is there to be seen before it occurs here must be predetermined from the point of view of man awake in a three-dimensional world. Thus, the question arises, are we able to alter our future? My object in writing these pages is to indicate possibilities inherent in man, to show that man can alter his future. But, thus altered, it forms again a deterministic sequence starting from a point of interference. A future that will be consistent with the alteration. The most remarkable feature of man's future is its flexibility. It is determined by his attitude rather than by his acts. The cornerstone on which all things are based is man's concept of himself. He acts as he does and has the experiences that he does because his concept of self is what it is, and for no other reason. Had he a different concept of self, he would act differently. A change of concept of self automatically alters his future, and a change in any term of his future series of experiences reciprocally alters his concept of self. Man's assumptions, which he regards as insignificant, produces effects that are considerable. Therefore, man should revise his estimate of an assumption and recognize its creative power. All changes take place in consciousness. The future, although prepared in every detail in advance, has several outcomes. At every moment of our lives, we have before us the choice of which of several futures we will choose. There are two actual outlooks on the world possessed by everyone, a natural focus and a spiritual focus. The ancient teachers called the one the carnal mind, the other mind, the mind of Christ. We may differentiate them as ordinary, waking consciousness, governed by our senses, and a controlled imagination, governed by desire. We recognize these two distinct centers of thought in the statement, the natural man receiveth not the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness unto him. Neither can he know them, for they are spiritually discerned. Corinthians 2:14. The natural view confines reality to the moment called now. To the natural view, the past and future are purely imaginary. The spiritual view, on the other hand, sees the contents of time. It sees events as distinct and separated as objects in space. The past and future are a present whole to the spiritual view. What is mental and subjective to the natural man is concrete and objective to the spiritual man. The habit of seeing only that which our senses permit render us totally blind to what we otherwise could see. To cultivate the faculty of seeing the invisible, we should often deliberately disentangle our minds from the evidence of the senses and focus our attention on an invisible state, mentally feeling it and sensing it until it has all the distinctiveness of reality. Earnest, concentrated thought focused in a particular direction shuts out other sensations and causes them to disappear. We have but to concentrate on the state desired in order to see it. The habit of withdrawing attention from the region of sensation and concentrating it on the invisible develops our spiritual outlook and enables us to penetrate beyond the world of sense and to see that which is invisible. For the invisible things of Him from the creation of the world are clearly seen. Romans 1:20. This vision is completely independent of the natural faculties. Open it and quicken it. Without it, these instructions are useless, for the things of the Spirit are spiritually discerned. A little practice will convince us that we can, by controlling our imagination, reshape our future in harmony with our desire. Desire is the mainspring of action. We could not move a single finger unless we had a desire to move it. No matter what we do, we follow the desire which at the moment dominates our mind. When we break a habit, our desire to break it is greater than our desire to continue in the habit. The desires which impel us to action are those that hold our attention. A desire is but an awareness of something we lack or need to make our life more enjoyable. Desires always have some personal gain in view. The greater the anticipated gain, the more intense is the desire. There is no absolutely unselfish desire. Where there is nothing to gain, there is no desire, and consequently, no action. The spiritual man speaks to the natural man through the language of desire. The key to progress in life and to the fulfillment of dreams lies in ready obedience to its voice. Unhesitating obedience to its voice is an immediate assumption of the wish fulfilled. To desire a state is to have it. As Pascal had said, "You would not have sought me had you not already found me." Man, by assuming the feeling of his wish fulfilled and then living and acting on this conviction, alters the future in harmony with his assumption. Assumption awaken what they affirm. As soon as man assumes the feeling of his wish fulfilled, his four-dimensional self finds ways for the attainment of this end, discovers methods for its realization. I know of no clearer definition of the means by which we realize our desires than to experience in imagination what we would experience in the flesh were we to achieve our goal. This experience of the end wields the means. With its larger outlook, the fourth-dimensional self then constructs the means necessary to realize the accepted end. The undisciplined mind finds it difficult to assume a state which is denied by the senses. Here is a technique that makes it easier to encounter events before they occur, to call things which are not seen as though they were. Romans 4:17. People have a habit of slighting the importance of simple things, but this simple formula for changing the future was discovered after years of searching and experimenting. The first step in changing the future is desire. That is, define your objective. Know definitely what you want. Secondly, construct an event which you believe you would encounter following the fulfillment of your desire. An event which implies fulfillment of your desire, something that will have the action of self predominant. Thirdly, immobilize the physical body and induce a condition akin to sleep. Lie on a bed or relax in a chair and imagine that you are sleepy. Then, with eyelids closed and your attention focused on the action you intend to experience in imagination, mentally feel yourself right into the proposed action, imagining all the while that you are actually performing the action here and now. You must always participate in the imaginary action, not merely stand back and look on, but you must feel that you are actually performing the action so that the imaginary sensation is real to you. It is important always to remember that the proposed action must be one which follows the fulfillment of your desire. And also, you must feel yourself into the action until it has all the vividness and distinctiveness of reality. For example, suppose you desired promotion in office. Being congratulated would be an event you would encounter following the fulfillment of your desire. Having selected this action as the one you will experience in imagination, immobilize the physical body and induce a state akin to sleep, a drowsy state, but one in which you are still able to control the direction of your thoughts. A state in which you are attentive without effort. Now imagine that a friend is standing before you. Put your imaginary hand into his. First, feel it to be solid and real. Then carry on an imaginary conversation with him in harmony with the action. Do not visualize yourself at a distance in point of space and at a distance in point of time being congratulated on your good fortune. Instead, make elsewhere here and the future now. The future event is a reality now in a dimensionally larger world. And, oddly enough, now in a dimensionally larger world is equivalent to here in the ordinary three-dimensional space of everyday life. The difference between feeling yourself in action here and now and visualizing yourself in action as though you were on a motion picture screen is the difference between success and failure. The difference will be appreciated if you will now visualize yourself climbing a ladder. Then, with eyelids closed, imagine that a ladder is right in front of you and you feel you are actually climbing it. Desire, physical immobility, bordering on sleep, and imaginary action in which self-feelingly predominates here and now are not only important factors in altering the future, but they are essential conditions in consciously projecting the spiritual self. If, when the physical body is immobilized, we become possessed of the idea to do something and imagine that we are doing it here and now, and keep the imaginary action feelingly going right up until sleep ensues, we are likely to awaken of the physical body to find ourselves in a dimensionally larger world with a dimensionally larger focus and actually doing what we desired and imagined we were doing in the flesh. But whether we awaken there or not, we are actually performing the action in the fourth dimensional world, and we will reenact it in the future here in the 3D world. Experience has taught me to restrict the imaginary action, to condense the idea which is to be the object of your meditation into a single act, and to reenact it over and over again until it has the feeling of reality. Otherwise, the action will wander off along an associational track and a host of associated images will be presented to our attention. In a few seconds, they will lead us hundreds of miles away from our objective in point and space, and years away in point of time. If we decide to climb a particular flight of stairs because there is the likely event to follow the realization of our desire, then we must restrict the action to climbing that particular flight of stairs. Should our attention wander off, we must bring it back to its task of climbing that flight of stairs and keep on doing so until the imaginary action has all the solidity and distinctiveness of reality. The idea must be maintained in the field of presentation without any sensible effort on our part. We must, with the minimum effort, permeate the mind with the feeling of the wish fulfilled. Drowsiness facilitates change because it favors attention without effort, but it must not be pushed to the stage of sleep. in which we shall no longer be able to control the movements of our attention, but rather a moderate degree of drowsiness in which we are still able to direct our thoughts. A most effective way to embody a desire is to assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled and then, in a relaxed and sleepy state, repeat over and over again, like a lullaby, any short phrase which implies fulfillment of our desire, such as "thank you," as though we address the higher power for having done it for us. If, however, we seek a conscious projection into a dimensionally larger world, then we must keep the action going right up until sleep ensues. Experience in imagination with all the distinctness of reality what would be experienced in the flesh were you to achieve your goal, and you shall, in time, meet it in the flesh as you met it in your imagination. Feed the mind with premises, that is, assertions presumed to be true, because assumptions, though unreal to the senses, if persisted in until they have the feeling of reality, will harden into facts. To an assumption, all means which promote its realization are good. It influences the behavior of all by inspiring in all the movements, the actions, and the words which tend towards its fulfillment. To understand how man molds his future in harmony with his assumption, we must know what we mean by a dimensionally larger world, for it is to a dimensionally larger world that we go to alter our future. The observation of an event before it occurs implies that the event is predetermined from the point of view of man in the three-dimensional world. Therefore, to change the conditions here in the 3D of space, we must first change them in the fourth dimensions of space. Man does not know exactly what is meant by a dimensionally larger world, and would no doubt deny the existence of a dimensionally larger self. He is quite familiar with the three dimensions of length, width, and height, and he feels that if there were a fourth dimension, it should be just as obvious to him as the dimensions of length, width, and height. A dimension is not a line. It is any way in which a thing can be measured that is entirely different from all other ways. That is, to measure a solid fourth dimensionally, we simply measure it in any direction except that of its length, width, and height. Is there any other way of measuring an object other than those of its width, length, and height? Time measures life without employing the three dimensions of length, width, and height. There is no such thing as instantaneous object. Its appearance and disappearance are measurable. It endures for a definite length of time. We can measure its lifespan without using the dimensions of length, width, and height. Time is definitely a fourth way of measuring an object. The more dimensions an object has, the more substantial and real it becomes. A straight line, which lies entirely in one dimension, acquires shape, mass, and substance by the addition of dimensions. What new quality would time, the fourth dimension, give, which would make it just as vastly superior to solids as solids are to surfaces and surfaces are to lines? Time is a medium for changes in experience because all changes take time. The new quality is changeability. Observe that if we dissect a solid, its cross-section will be a surface. By bisecting a surface, we obtain a line, and by bisecting a line, we get a point. This means that a point is but a cross-section of a line, which is in turn but a cross-section of a surface, which is in turn but a cross-section of a solid, which is in turn, if carried to its logical conclusion, but a cross-section of a fourth-dimensional object. We cannot avoid the inference that all tridimensional objects are but cross-sections of four-dimensional bodies, which means when I meet you, I mean a cross-section of the fourth dimensional you, the fourth-dimensional self that is not seen. To see the four-dimensional self, I must see every cross-section or moment of your life from birth to death and see them all as coexisting. My focus should take in the entire array of sensory impressions which you have experienced on earth, plus those you might encounter. I should see them not in the order in which they were experienced by you, but as a present whole, because change is the characteristic of the fourth dimension. I should see them in a state of flux and a living, animated whole. If we have all this clearly fixed in our minds, what does it mean to us in this three-dimensional world? It means that if we can move along times 9, we can see the future and alter it as we so desire. This world, which we think so solidly real, is a shadow out of which and beyond which we may at any time pass. It is an abstraction from a more fundamental and dimensionally larger world. A more fundamental world abstracted from a still more fundamental and dimensionally larger world, and so on to infinity. The absolute is unattainable by any means of analysis, no matter how many dimensions we add to the world. Man can prove the existence of a dimensionally larger world simply by focusing his attention on an invisible state and imagining that he sees and feels it. If he remains concentrated in this state, his present environment will pass away and he will awaken in a dimensionally larger world, where the object of his contemplation will be seen as a concrete, objective reality. Intuitively, I feel that were he to abstract his thoughts from this dimensionally larger world and retreat still further within his mind, he would again bring about an externalization of time. He would discover that every time he retreats into his inner mind and brings about an externalization of time, space becomes the dimensionally larger, and he would therefore conclude that both time and space are serial, and that the drama of life is just but the climbing of a multi-level dimensional time. Scientists will one day explain why there is a serial universe, but in practice, how we use this serial universe to change the future is more important. To change the future, we need only concern ourselves with two worlds in this infinite series: the world we know by reason of our bodily organs, and the world we perceive independently of our bodily organs. This is the end of the chapter. I apologize for some of the mistakes I made while reading, while doing the voiceover. I apologize. I'm not feeling as fresh as I'm supposed to feel right now. But anyhow, let's get into the explanation. This is a chapter that is fundamentally what you need to manifest, and it's pretty much Neville Goddard 101 manifestation techniques, because you need to understand what it means to actually live in your imagination, which by Neville Goddard terms is called living in the end, or living the embodiment of the wish fulfilled. And this is why this chapter is so important. There's a few things we need to talk about. The first thing is we need to understand that when we live in our imagination is actually more potent and more important than what we see with our senses. And this goes against everything we have been taught, because we are taught to be more materialistic. And I don't mean materialism in the sense of what we own and what we get and the desire for more things that are material. I'm talking about the philosophical concept of materialism, which is the belief in what we see, which is limiting in a sense that there's so many intangible and so many things that are not concrete per se, that if we limit ourselves to materialism, we will not be able to fathom or to a certain extent understand what the unseen has to offer. So when we can understand that our thoughts create, that our feelings create, that our moods create, and that our imagination, first and foremost, is what precedes what we actually see in our world, we can actually work with this imagination and actually discipline it so the things we see, the things we can touch, the things we can smell will match the things we have previously worked upon in our mind, because it is work. And by work, I mean it is an effort. First effort you need to understand and you need to put forth is the effort of understanding and convincing yourself that your mind is the forerunner of all things. So you should place more importance on the inner experience rather than what you see. And why this is so important? Because when you start doing this, you will react less. What I mean by that, if you are poor, for example, right now, and you imagine riches, money, abundance, etc., material welfare, if you are convinced to a certain extent that what you see in your imagination is more important and more potent, and what you see in your imagination precedes your reality, your 3D reality, then by definition, logically, you will not react when you see that your 3D reality does not match your imagination yet. What I mean by that, you imagine to be rich, you see your bill, you see your bank account, you have a bill to pay, you don't have enough to pay. I'm taking an extreme example. But if the case is that your imagination is already very potent in your mind, and the vision of your imagination and the faith you hold upon this imagination is very strong in you, then it doesn't matter what happens in your 3D reality, because you have impressed your subconscious mind in a way that makes your mind, not even you consciously, your mind is impregnated, your subconscious mind more specifically is impregnated with the seed. Therefore, you will, without even knowingly, see the world in your 3D reality as something that just did not match your reality yet. Most of the time you'll be completely neutral about it. You just brush it aside automatically. You don't necessarily have to do it. It's just automatic. You don't react to it. You don't react negatively to things that are not yet aligned with your vision. That's what I want to say. So that is very important. And obviously, the desire is key, because when you have a desire, all you need to do is to change this desire into the wish fulfilled. For example, you want a specific person. This person is not with you right now. That is the desire. You desire to be with this specific person. To change it in the wish fulfilled, you see yourself as being with this person. And how do you see yourself being with this person? Well, there are many ways, but I will talk about the ones he talked about in this particular chapter. The number one is to construct the scene, a short scene, 10, 15 seconds of living in the wish fulfilled. For example, and I'm keeping this example of the specific person. Let's say, okay, let's go to the other extreme. You are married with this person. You want to get married with this person. You imagine yourself being with this person, man or woman. Let's go more specifically in the details. For example, you don't need to use this example, but that's just an example that I got out of the top of my head. Let's say, well, I'm a guy and I'm straight, so I would imagine myself with a woman. And I would not imagine myself at the wedding, because we want to always imagine ourselves after the wish has been fulfilled. If my goal is to be married, I would not imagine myself at the wedding. You could if you want to, but it's even better to imagine yourself after the wedding, 6 months after the wedding, on your honeymoon, 1 year after your wedding, 3 years after your wedding. So I would imagine myself, for example, okay, let's say honeymoon. During a honeymoon, which is after the wedding, and I'll be on the beach, for example, in Bali, Indonesia, and I'll hold the hand of my spouse and look into her eyes and tell her how happy I am to be with her, and she will respond by saying the same, looking into my eyes, saying that she's very happy to be here. And I will just loop it over and over again, just 15-20 seconds of a scene. I like to do longer scenes because I get more into it, but shorter is always better. Don't exceed, it's hard to loop a scene over and over again if it exceeds 30 seconds, honestly, you know what I mean? So 30 seconds maximum would be better. But then again, to each their own. If it works for you, if you have a scene that is a 1 minute long scene and you can loop it over 30 times and you can do it and it feels good, more power to you. But shorter is generally better for most of people. So I would loop this over and over again, and I would loop it in a drowsy state, which is before you fall asleep, generally speaking, or after you have meditated, or after you have meditated. I do both most of the time. You want to be in a drowsy state, which means you want to be sleepy. But this is if you do not know meditation. If you know meditation, you don't necessarily need to be sleepy, because the meditation will induce this equivalence of a state akin to sleep. Which doesn't mean that you need to be sleepy. Generally speaking, when you are sleepy, you will have less distraction because the mind is too tired to be distracted. If you are sleep deprived, this is a great example. I had sleep deprivation problems for a few years, and when I go 24 hours, 30 hours, 36 hours without sleeping, you would see that the mind cannot focus too much because the mind is too tired. So the mind will be focused on whatever you do because it's kind of in a survival mode, quote unquote. So when you reach this drowsy state, and bear in mind, the drowsy state doesn't mean that you are falling asleep. When you are visualizing, you are in a drowsy state of mind or meditative state, but you are still able to visualize, because sometimes you're just too tired to visualize, and it happens a lot, especially before sleep. So you need to find this right balance between being drowsy enough that you don't have any distractions, not a lot of distraction to a certain extent, but not too drowsy that you are actually falling asleep as soon as you start doing the process. That's why you want to do it in a position that it will not make you fall asleep too quickly, if you know what I mean. So once you are in this state of akin to sleep and you visualize over and over again, and you assume the state of the wish fulfilled. And prior to sleep and while falling asleep, and that's the other part, because yes, you can do it, you should do it in a sitting position, but even better, when you're about to go to sleep, while you fall asleep, you visualize it before your last waking moment, which means that you pretty much loop it over and over again until you fall asleep. And I understand, I just said that you don't want to fall asleep with it. That is, if you do it before, when you're sitting, you can also do it while you fall asleep. It's even more powerful. But if you don't do it before, while you were sitting, and you just fall asleep with it, there is a risk that you might fall asleep too soon and you might not even have the energy. So the one you do, the session, quote unquote, you do before you are lying down and falling asleep is the security, so to speak. It is your third wheel, just in case you're too tired to fall asleep with it. And by all means, do both. Do both. Maybe it's even better to go start a session and go to sleep before you're completely exhausted. Because if you're really completely exhausted, just sitting down and visualizing might be too hard because you just don't have the energy. So try to do this when you're not completely exhausted. And that's very important. What else I can talk about? Okay, of course, this is not mentioned in the chapter, but it goes without saying. You need to not contradict what you have impressed on your subconscious mind while you are having your sessions. In other words, you don't want to dig up the seed. If you visualize being rich, if you visualize being with your specific person, but during the day, during your waking moments, you contradict this by having thoughts that are not aligned with this vision, or you have fears and stuff like this, it is important to have your affirmations, your mental diet in a very, very strict manner. But then again, I digress. This is a topic for another day. Let's keep it simple and let's finish on this chapter. So remember, your fourth dimension, your imagination is more important than what you see in your 3D reality, because it precedes it, and that's where everything is created. Desire is the first thing, because you need a desire, but this really doesn't need an explanation because we all know what is desire. The second thing that is more important is what you do with this desire. If this desire is just a lack and just pining over things in lack, then you're not using your desires correctly. If this desire is converted, so to speak, into living in the end, into the fourth dimension and your imaginal acts, then this is the good use of desire. So you create your scene, and I forgot to mention, you create your scene in a first person perspective, which means you do not see yourself as if you were watching yourself in the movie. You see yourself from the bird's eye point of view, which means that you see through your eyes. That is very important, and as Neville Goddard said, this is the key between success and failure. So remember this, first person point of view. Construct the scene, short scene, loop it over and over again while you are sitting in a drowsy meditative state, and or when you fall asleep. More and than all, but you can do both. And as I said, the important thing is to not be too tired. And there you go. This is the basic fundamentals of manifestation by Neville Goddard. I hope this was helpful. I apologize for the mistakes that I made while doing the voiceover of this chapter. Hope you will bear with me. Thank you so much for listening. I am Sebastian, your manifestation mindset and meditation coach. If you need more information about me, please check in the description box below. Please like, share, and subscribe for more content of this type. Thank you so much, and I'll see you very soon.